Welcome everyone, and thanks for taking the time to join us today. My name is Priscilla, and I'm on the marketing team here at Samsara. I think many of you are probably looking forward to hearing from Brian, our training manager. Unfortunately, he had something come up last minute, so he's not able to be with us today. But I do have Gabby and Mike on the line, who will be our product experts for this training.
Hello.
Hey everyone.
That's Gabby and Mike there. Our training today will focus on how to effectively manage hours of service through the upcoming changes with the final rule. And as you may know, our ELD compliance solution is designed to be an easy to use platform for your team to be efficient while maintaining compliance. So we're excited to give you a preview of the features that will be available to support you as the final rule goes into effect next week. For today's training, Gabby will go over 3 key areas: the September 29th changes coming up, key updates to the driver app that we've made to support these changes, and also best practices for managing hours of service for administrators. We'll take you through some of the key workflows for your team and then move into announcements and a live Q&A with Mike at the very end. After the training, you'll get a recording of the session and a follow-up email. We also have our stellar support and customer success teams on the line ready to answer your questions. You should see that Q&A box on your computer just like what you're seeing on the screen. Sorry, Gabby, go back 1 slide for me. So if you have questions, please type it in. I know a number of you have been chatting with our team already. The team will answer everything that they can and will follow up on anything that we're unable to get to or help out with live during the webinar. So I do have 5 support and customer success team members with me today: Beth, Blake, Ryan, Danny, and Kathleen, and they will be taking care of you today. All right, so to kick us off, Samsara has a mission of improving the efficiency, safety, and sustainability of the operations that power our economy. For the past few years, we've been focusing on driving innovations in the areas of real-time data, artificial intelligence, and open APIs. And we have a really large team dedicated to research and development and also customer support. So all of our teams read the feedback submissions that we get from you. So if you are giving those to us, keep those coming because we use those suggestions to inspire our new features. Today, we've grown to serve over 1,500 organizations worldwide across a variety of industries in both the public and private sector. And we truly believe that this is a partnership. So on behalf of the entire Samsara team, I want to just thank you for choosing us and trusting us with your business. So to get started on our ELD and hours of service topic today, let's kick it off with a poll. So the question is, what is the biggest hours of service pain point that you are facing? So let me launch this poll here. You should see that pop up on your screen. Take a look, pick the option that resonates with you the best, and I'll give you guys some time to make your selection. Okay, let's see. So looks like a lot of people, almost 50%, have the biggest pain point of training your drivers. And then next in line is keeping up with hours of service regulations, about 1/3 of you, and followed by changes to DOT inspections or audits, keeping up with the latest hours of service product features, and followed by training admin. So if you can resonate with any of these areas, you're not alone. We'll be talking about keeping up with regulations today, obviously with the final rule, and we'll see if Gabby has some ideas and tips on how to make sure that drivers know what they're supposed to be doing here. So actually, I have another question for you. Do you find the Samsara hours of service compliance tools easy to use? So I'm going to pop this back up there. Take a moment, choose the one that you feel represents you the best, and I'll give you a little bit of time to make your selection again. All right, it looks like a lot of folks are finding the compliance tools pretty easy to use. Some people are not quite sure, and that's okay. I think there's a lot of change that's happening on the regulatory front and also in the product. And we've got a group of people who don't find it easy to use, and we would love your feedback. So please continue to send your feedback in via the feedback section, either in the driver app or our product, the feedback button in the dashboard as well. So with that, I'll pass it off to Gabby. Thank you all for giving us your input, and I hope that, yeah, you guys find the training today to be helpful.
Thanks, Priscilla. I'm really excited to dive in today. So just as a quick reminder, we'll be talking about managing HOS with the final rule today. So we'll kick off by covering the changes with the final rule, really understand how this impacts logging for your drivers. And then we'll cover some key driver app updates and HOS management for admins to help you maintain compliance through these changing regulations. Now, let's start by covering the changes in the final rule. At a high level, the final rule was issued by the FMCSA to introduce more flexibility and autonomy for both carriers and drivers. There are 4 key changes to be aware of, and these are around the 30-minute break period, the split sleeper berth exception, the adverse driving exception, and the short haul exception. So we'll dive into each of these and how they impact logging over the next few slides. And just as a reminder, Samsara will be providing full support for when the final rule goes into effect on September 29th. So you can rest assured that your team will be ready for any of the changes. So we'll kick off with the first major change to the 30-minute break period. So you'll see here in the original rule, drivers couldn't drive after being on duty for more than 8 hours without taking a 30-minute off-duty break. Note that's off-duty. So now with the final rule, drivers can actually satisfy the 30-minute break with a few different statuses. It can be either on duty not driving, they can be off duty, or they can use sleeper berth time. And additionally, with this change, break requirements change to being required after 8 hours of driving time, not on duty time. So definitely important pieces to note. So let's take a look at what this actually looks like within the driver app. So you see here on the left, we have an example of what the driver app looks like operating under the original rule. So you'll see here we've gone into on duty already, and this has started to work against the until break countdown clock. So very important to note. And this clock is only going to reset if you have a 30-minute consecutive session of on an off-duty status. So those are a couple of the things we saw in the original rule. You'll see here some of the changes in the final rule that you'll notice in the driver app. You'll see we've also gone into on duty in this version of the driver app. We've been in on duty for 14 minutes, but it actually hasn't affected the break countdown clock at all, because again, you need that driving time to start counting down towards that break. And you'll notice that that clock is only going to reset if you meet that 30 minutes of consecutive non-driving status. So that could be off duty, on duty, not driving, or that split sleeper berth that we had talked about a little bit earlier. So the next major change is with regard to the split sleeper berth exception. So within the original rule, it was really only that 8-2 split that was allowed. And then within that split, that 2-hour window is actually going to count against your driver's 14-hour driving window. So some really interesting changes that we see with the final rule. Drivers can now actually split the required 10 hours off duty, and they can do that either by doing an 8-2 split or a 7-3 split. So you see a little bit of that theme of flexibility being introduced into the rules. And then what you'll see also is that that second portion, so either the 2-hour or the 3-hour section, is not going to count against the 14-hour driving window. So again, a lot of times throughout this rule, you see just the additional flexibility that drivers are able to leverage when they're using the split sleeper berth exception. So if we dive into what this actually looks like within a log, you'll see we have 2 different logs here, one reflecting what the original rule looks like, one showing some of the changes within the final rule. So in this top log showing the original rule, you'll see kind of the classic sleeper berth that we've been able to see, where you see the 8-2 split with that 8 hours in that first section, and then the 2 hours towards the end. And that 2 hours is going to count against shift time. You'll see in the bottom log over here, some of the changes in the final rule that you'll see is that now in addition to the 8-2 split, we have that 7-3 split. So introducing that flexibility as well as that second section, so the 3-hour or 2-hour section, not counting against shift time. So really throughout the split sleeper berth exception, the changes really are providing more flexibility for your drivers to kind of leverage split sleeper in the way that works best for them. So the third major change with the final rule is with regard to the adverse driving condition exception. So with the original rule, when drivers were using the exception, they were limited to driving up to 2 hours beyond their maximum driving time. And now you'll note in the graphic over here, this actually doesn't impact the maximum driving window. So drivers still need to complete that time within the same driving window. So sometimes that can be a little bit challenging. So the FMCSA definitely listened to a lot of the comments around flexibility here. So with the final rule, when using the exception, drivers can now extend not just their maximum driving time by 2 hours, but they can also add an additional 2 hours to their driving window. So you see that flexibility both in drive time and the driving window. So you can really ensure that drivers are leveraging this exception safely, especially if driving conditions are not optimal. So what this looks like in the driver app, you'll see that claiming this exception will increase that drive clock. So you see on the left-hand side over here under the original rule, the drive clock is at 13 hours. So we've bumped up the classic 11 hours to 13 hours with those 2 additional hours of drive time. But you'll see shift time is still 14 hours. So that hasn't changed. So within the final rule, you'll see on the right-hand side in the driver app that the drive time has also increased to 13 hours, so an additional 2 hours. But then you'll see that the shift clock is now at 16 hours, not 14 hours. So you see the addition of 2 hours there as well. Again, seeing that theme of flexibility kind of throughout the changes here. And the final change is around the short haul logging exception. So with the original rule, the exception was limited to drivers operating within 100 air miles of their work reporting location. So you'll see that reflected up at the top. And those drivers were also limited to only 12 hours of on-duty time. So again, FMCSA heard a lot of comments kind of around the flexibility here. So major updates to note with the final rule. One, the radius of the short haul logging exception is actually expanded to 150 air miles. And then any short haul drivers who are eligible for that will actually have a maximum on-duty period of 14 hours. So you'll note that there's an additional 2 hours compared with the original rule. So what this looks like in practice, you'll see that in the original rule, we had that 12-hour shift clock for short haul, and drivers would be taken out of short haul when crossing that 100 air mile radius from their starting location. You'll see on the right over here, their shift clock is actually increased to 14 hours as reflecting the final rule, and drivers are going to be taken out of short haul when they're crossing that 150 air mile radius from their starting location. So that's a little bit about all of the major changes that we'll see in the final rule. And we know that as you're navigating the impact to workflows with the final rule, it's really important to make sure that your drivers and admins can effectively maintain compliance throughout these changes. So over the next few minutes, I'm actually going to be doing a live demo of the driver app to help show you how we're helping your drivers maintain compliance. So let me just get set up here, but a quick overview of what we'll be covering today. So I'll show you live in the driver app, and we'll be covering just making regular updates to the driver app. We'll cover the brand new assignments page. We'll talk about the new ELD cab kits that are in the driver app. We'll talk about connectivity, and we'll come back into the presentation to chat a little bit about the direct USB connection offering that we have. So let me just swipe over here so you can see my driver app. So we'll hop right into the driver app over here. So you'll see that we're on the sign-in page. So this is what your drivers see when they're signing into their driver app. And I just want to highlight a new kind of feature of this page. So you'll see at the bottom over here, there's this new section for ELD in-cab materials. So you'll go in here and you can see you actually have all of the required in-cab materials that your drivers will need that's required under compliance. So you see we have our driver app manual available in here that you can easily click into, take a look at any of the instructions there. And we also have any of the transfer page instruction sheets, depending on what your drivers need. So you'll see you can easily click into that and your drivers have that accessible digitally. So really important to note that this digital version satisfies all of the requirements, just like any paper versions would do. So it makes it a lot easier for your drivers to access this, make sure that they have access to those materials if they're on the go. So definitely a great resource to point your drivers to and show them that they have that accessible through their driver app. Now, I'll just take this moment to also quickly pause on the screen and just talk through the importance of having your drivers build a habit of signing in at the beginning of their shift and signing out at the end of every shift. And ensuring that they build this habit helps to make sure that your drivers have the latest version of the driver app. So definitely encourage your drivers to kind of build this habit into their daily routine. When you get those regular updates, your drivers get access to the latest features within their Samsara driver app. And I just want to highlight that this is super important, especially in light of the final rule. So it'll be essential for your drivers to update their apps. So ensure they're doing that ahead of September 29th for the final rule. And with that, we'll go ahead and log in over here. So I'm just going to go sign in. We're hopping into the driver app. And you'll notice we actually have an update that we've introduced to the assignments page. So before, this page only had vehicle selection, so you only really had this piece right here. But we've also introduced a couple other components. We've added in trailer selection, we've added in shipping IDs, and we know how important these pieces of information are to your driver's HOS logs. So we added them to the assignments page to ensure that your drivers aren't forgetting these key pieces of information. So I'm going to go in, go ahead and select a vehicle. I'll add a trailer number 3, and my shipping ID is actually already in there. You'll note that you'll receive a suggestion for shipping IDs based on what you've used previously, just to make that a little bit easier for your drivers as they're selecting their shipping ID. So I'm going to go ahead and click done. And just want to quickly note, now that we're all logged into the driver app, if you hit the settings cog in the top right-hand corner, you'll also be able to access those ELD in-cab materials if you click help. So same access that you got on the sign-in screen, just after you've already signed in. So your drivers have a couple different places that they'll be able to access that information. So when it comes to compliance, we know how crucial it is to ensure that HOS logs are accurate and up to date. And sometimes drivers may go into areas of low or no connectivity, but you and your drivers can actually rest assured knowing that HOS is still maintained. We've actually introduced a new feature to help your drivers see what their connectivity is like. So I'm just going to go into airplane mode to mock up being in an area of no connectivity. You'll see that this little bar popped up at the top that says working offline, no direct ELD connection. So with this, this is a great signal to your drivers to let them know that their driver app is working offline. But I think the great thing about this is that if you dive in a little bit more, you see that Samsara is actually built to work offline. So all of that HOS data is still being collected, and the moment your driver hits that connection again, all of that information will be updated into the cloud. So there's really no need to worry about your HOS, even if you're hitting those areas of low or no connectivity. So speaking of connectivity, I'm just going to hop back into our presentation over here. We're actually introducing kind of a new offering for connectivity. So we're introducing a direct USB connection. So your drivers can actually connect their mobile device directly with a vehicle gateway via USB. So we know that some drivers don't use the Samsara Wi-Fi hotspot to be able to connect their driver app. So those drivers are able to leverage our new direct USB connection to be able to maintain HOS through any areas with no cellular coverage. So it really gives you that flexibility for how you want to keep your drivers connected with regards to HOS. Now, I know we covered quite a bit but whether it's our digital ELD cab kits, our assignments page, or connectivity updates, your drivers can really rest assured knowing that the driver app makes it easy to maintain compliance in the midst of all of these changing regulations. So we've covered a lot around new updates to help ensure that your drivers maintain compliance. But of course, that's just one part of the equation. It's also important to ensure that your admins have the tools they need to maintain compliance through changing regulation. So I'll be doing a live demo kind of covering different areas around managing HOS for admins. Quick overview of what we'll be covering. We'll talk about managing drivers specifically as it relates to some of those exceptions with the final rule. We'll cover the compliance dashboard, the HOS violation alert, our automated yard move annotation, camera ID for unassigned hours of service, and the HOS audit log. So let me just hop into my demo over here. And so let's see. All right, my internet is being a little bit slow, but I think we're up and running. So I wanted to give you a quick overview of just how to navigate some of the exceptions as we think about what changes with the final rule. So it's going to be super important to know how to modify exceptions for your drivers. So I just went into the settings cog over here. I'm going to go ahead and hit drivers over here. And if you have any drivers that are going to need some of those exceptions within the rule sets, you can go ahead and click into any of your drivers. Go ahead and click edit and scroll down to any of the exceptions that we have available here. You'll see available in the dashboard, we have the short haul exception. So on the 29th, this will update to only the 150 air mile short haul exception. And then we also have the adverse driving one. So those will both be accessible and updated to meet the final rules on September 29th. Also just want to quickly note that on this page, we have a really helpful how-to guide to help you fill out any basic information for drivers. So we have these tutorials to kind of help walk you through how to kind of navigate these pages. So when it comes to compliance and all of these different changing regulations, it's super important to keep a pulse on just how your fleet is performing as a whole with regards to compliance. So we introduced our compliance dashboard a little while back, which you can access in here. I have one preloaded for us that we'll take a peek at. But the compliance dashboard it's really a great way to get an overview of how your fleet is performing as a whole with regards to compliance. We dig into key compliance metrics like HOS violations, unidentified driving, and unassigned segments to really give you that great overview of how your fleet is performing. And you can also filter this by tags depending on how you group your drivers. And you can use this to compare performance across different driver groups or terminals. Really great tool to kind of get that visibility at a high level. Now, with regards to HOS violations, if that is something that you are looking to kind of get ahead of a little bit more, we actually introduced a while back our driver HOS, wrong one over here, our driver HOS violation alert, which you can easily configure in your dashboard. So if you go in and hit configure, I'll just let this load over here. You'll see we have a ton of alerts, but the one that we'll focus on for right now is that driver HOS violation alert. So this alert is really great because you can get an alert ahead of time, letting you know if a driver is about to cause an HOS violation. So you can easily customize this if you want to know, let's say 30 minutes ahead of time before that violation occurs. Select the type of violation that you would like to know about. Let's say I want to know about shift duty limit. You can also select the drivers that this alert applies to, so all drivers, a specific tag or specific drivers, and then select who this notification goes out to. So we know a lot of our customers have leveraged this to kind of get ahead of HOS violations, stay in contact with their drivers if anyone is approaching a violation. So as we're thinking through key metrics to stay ahead of just staying on top of those HOS violations, this alert is a great tool. Now we know that another important metric to keep an eye on are those unassigned hours of service. We know those can be pretty pesky. So I've loaded our unassigned hours of service report here. And I know that one of the biggest contributors to unassigned hours of service are those yard moves. So those really short moves that occur where you need to track down maybe who was driving or if it was even a yard move, and that tends to be a pretty big contributor to those unassigned hours of service. So we've actually introduced a feature where any of those yard moves can automatically get annotated as a yard move based on a geofence. So I'll show you a little bit of what that means if we click into this specific trip. So I'll let that go ahead and load. But we'll see here that this specific trip occurred within a yard. I don't know if that is actually loading, but you'll see that we've actually created this Hardee's Houston warehouse as a geofence. So you can mark any of your geofences specifically as a yard. So if you have multiple warehouses, you can go in and mark those as yards. And then any segments that occur within those geofences will automatically be annotated as a yard move. So this reduces a ton of that time that your team is spending kind of annotating those yard moves, tracking them down, making sure they're yard moves, and really reducing that workload for your back office. And I know that it's not just yard moves that contribute to unassigned hours of service. There are times when drivers forget to sign in and are not kind of attached to those driving segments. So wanted to just show you a quick example here of how some of our customers are leveraging our camera ID actually to help out with unassigned hours of service. So you'll see here there is this camera ID column here within the unassigned hours of service report with a driver suggested here. So what we've done is for any of our customers who have our dual facing dash cams, we actually help to give direct visibility into the cab for an unassigned driving segment. So instead of tracking down all sorts of paperwork, going through all of your driving assignments, you can actually just go in and you'll see here, we'll take a peek at this, you can actually just get direct visibility into the cab to see who is driving at the time of that unassigned driving segment. You'll see we even go a step further than that and actually offer a suggestion for who might have been driving during that unassigned segment. So all your team needs to do is go in, verify that this suggestion is correct, select the correct duty status and hit save. So that really reduces a lot of that back and forth time spent kind of tracking down drivers by actually just giving you that direct visibility and applying our camera ID. And final kind of thing that I wanted to cover is we know that DOT audits do not come up often with regards to compliance, but when they do, it's really, really important to kind of stay prepared for those. So we also introduced our driver's hours of service audit log report. So this report is really great because as you're going through a DOT audit and are sending data files out to the DOT, this report actually gives you visibility into when data files were requested, the status of whether it was accepted or if there are issues with the data file. So you can really get visibility into whether or not those data files were transferred effectively. So if there are issues, you can get ahead of them and rest assured knowing that all of your data files have gone through. So I know we covered a lot today, and that will conclude kind of the demo portion of our time today. But just to kind of go through and give a quick recap of everything that we covered today, I'll switch back over into the presentation. So quick recap, Samsara is here to help you manage HOS with the final rule. And to help you with that today, we covered the changes with the final rule. So the 30-minute rest break, the split sleeper berth exception, adverse driving exception, and the short haul exception. We covered some key updates to the driver app to help keep your drivers compliant. So we covered that in-app ELD cab kit, the new assignment page, and ways to keep your team connected. So those connectivity states and our USB connection. And finally, we covered managing HOS for admins. So all of those exemptions that we covered and how to kind of toggle that on within the dashboard, covered the compliance dashboard, HOS violation alert, yard moves, camera ID, and the HOS audit transfer report. So I know, again, we did cover quite a bit today, so you'll be receiving a copy of this presentation as well as the recording, so you can kind of navigate that on your own time to refer back to any of the content that we covered today. So with that, we'll go ahead and transition to a time of Q&A, and I will pass it back to Priscilla.
Thanks, Gabby. So as Gabby mentioned, we've gone through a lot of information. I know that you guys have been submitting a ton of questions, so a big thank you again to our support and customer success team members who have been answering those live on chat. I'm happy to be here with Mike, our product manager, who's overseeing the ELD compliance features that Gabby just went over for all of us. And I know that there have been a lot of themes that I've been noticing around certain types of questions. So I'm happy to have Mike address those right now. So let's kind of dig into this first question, Mike. There's a question, and actually the general theme is, how do all of these final rule changes impact property versus passenger drivers? What is the difference between them? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. Happy to answer this question. Before Samsara, I used to work in passenger transit, so definitely appreciate all the audience we have and asking those questions here today. Yeah, so basically we have the 4 rules that all apply to property. There are some of these rules that also impact passenger, namely the adverse driving exception. So both property and passenger drivers are able to claim this exemption and get that 2 extra hours on their driving limit, as well as their shift limit, their driving window limit for those 2 hours. And then for our short haul air mile radius feature, those changes will also impact the passenger. So basically for passenger, we have the adverse driving and the short haul exception, whereas the all 4 rules apply to the property rule sets.
Cool. I think another good follow-up on that is related to just what people need to do to be able to see the new rule changes. Do they have to go change a setting? What is your advice there?
That's a great question. So, the way we've built it is we basically have a driver app version that's available for all of you today that contains all of these changes. And then on September 29th at midnight, we will automatically push those changes. So your drivers won't need to do anything. Your admins won't need to do anything on September 29th. All new shifts that start on September 29th or later will be logging under the new rules. And the dashboard will also reflect those changes. So as long as you're on the driver app version that's most relevant, which you can sort of see in our knowledge base articles, you won't need to do anything special there, and drivers will be able to just have those changes moving forward.
Cool. I see a lot of questions related to the 100 versus 150 air miles for the short haul. Mike, maybe you clarify that a little bit?
Sure, I'll talk a little bit about this. So this is actually a beta feature we have right now that you can call in and have enabled. But basically, it's an exemption that's specific for the short haul drivers that don't need to log normal hours. Again, they're changing it from 100 air miles in 12-hour shifts to 150 air miles in 14-hour shifts. But basically, the idea is we basically keep a time card for the driver whenever they are within that air mile radius, and then once they actually exceed that, either by driving too far or going over their shift window or putting them back onto a normal log. Like I mentioned, this is currently in beta, and we're planning to GA this in the future. But if you're curious to learn more, you can call in and ask about it, because it is one of the changes that we are supporting for those beta customers that are using it today. But yeah, definitely feel free to reach out for more information there.
Yeah, a couple follow-up questions related to that. There's a question about, does the 150 miles also apply to passenger carriers? So maybe we touch on that too, and then I'll ask the second one in a second.
Yep, it does. It will also apply to passenger carriers.
Okay. And then related to when this goes into effect with how the driver app and the dashboard will basically push the new rules, there's a question about what if there are shifts that kind of are going from the 28th to the 29th? Some questions related to that same kind of idea with sleeper berth. Can you help us kind of clarify and understand that piece?
Yeah, so basically what we're saying is whenever you go from the 28th into the 29th, so I start my shift at 8 p.m. and then carry into the next day, the 29th, that specific shift will still be evaluated on the old rules. Any new shifts that start from the 29th onwards will then be applied to the the new rules. So there might be some overlap there for some of your drivers that maybe operate overnight, but again, they should be addressed the following day on the new rules.
Great. So we have some questions here about helping drivers make sure that their app is updated. What happens if the driver maybe does not have the updated app version and the 29th rolls around?
Yeah, so basically what happens there, if you're not on the appropriate version, again, the version you're looking for is 6460 or anything above as the relevant app version. But what'll happen is basically the app will still reflect the old rules. So if the drivers are not changing how they're logging or anything, they're not going to see any more violations. As the new rules are more forgiving as well, this will kind of be the way it works. So there won't be any issues compliance-wise. Again, they're just not going to have the advantage of being able to log under the new rules without sort of seeing those violations. For example, if I'm on the 29th and I take a 30-minute on-duty rest break, which is technically allowed, but my driver app isn't updated, I'm actually going to have a violation there because the violation isn't an off-duty. The dashboard will still show the new rules. So one thing to call out as well is that the dashboard on the 29th is going to show the new rules regardless, whether the driver apps are updated or not. So we definitely encourage drivers to have their apps updated so that there's consistency there. One reason we keep the dashboard on the new rules is because that's what the DOT is going to evaluate drivers under. So we want the admins to know what's going on from that perspective as well. So that's one thing to call out as well.
Thanks, Mike. So there's kind of a couple questions here. Should we ask drivers to update their apps now, or should they wait for the please update your app? I'm guessing the answer to that is, hey, if they are able to update their apps now, that's the best kind of course of action to make sure that everything is ready for the 29th. Is that correct, Mike?
Yeah, that's correct. So basically, there's a couple of ways. If you're on sort of a much older version, we definitely encourage drivers to go to their Google Play or Apple App Store and update that way. And that's sort of that process. If you're use a mobile device manager, we have an Android APK file that can be used by admins to then push that update out to drivers. And if you're on a relatively newer version of the app, you should already see drivers have a version of 6460 or higher. But yeah, if they're on sort of an older version, a lot of you are calling out 5550 as what they're seeing. They will need to go into the Google Play or Apple App Store and update it that way.
Cool. Let's shift gears a little bit. I see a lot of questions related to yard move. So yard move option, automatically annotating the uninside driving. I think that might be related to the geofence that Gabby showed earlier. I think there's also some questions around when does it count as on duty? When does it count as off duty? Who gets to use yard move? So maybe Mike, you can clarify those questions.
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about yard moves. So we have two different features. One is like a driver duty status. And basically, some of you have been asking, does this status satisfy the 30-minute break requirement? In our system, it will. So we're counting it as on duty, so drivers are able to take 30 minutes. And if it's all, again, it won't likely all be in yard move because they're likely very shorter segments, but they're able to use that as a 30-minute requirement for their break, so they can use that status to satisfy the break. And not all your drivers have this enabled, so you actually have to go into the driver settings and have it as a toggle. So basically it's a setting that says yard move. The same thing for personal conveyance. By default, we don't show that, but admins have the ability to enable drivers to select those duty statuses. And yeah, so that's basically that part of the yard move. But then we also have our auto annotation feature. So like Gabby showed before, if you have a geofence around your yard and you mark it as a yard in our system in the settings, any unassigned segments within that geofence will automatically be annotated as a yard move. This should only be used by non-driver moves. So think about this as a feature meant for mechanics or other people that don't need to log hours of service. It's mainly for, again, those mechanic moves that an admin would automatically annotate as a yard move or a mechanic move or something like that. Drivers, even in those same scenarios, if drivers are moving those trucks, they should still be signing in and selecting the yard move duty status so that their hours and on-duty time is appropriately reflected.
Okay, I have a question here. Do changes impact drivers on state rule sets? I know we focused a lot on these 4 particular changes for the final rule, but how does that interact with these other rule sets?
Great question. So this will not impact drivers on state rule sets at all. So in most cases, they don't have a rest break. Texas is a popular one that our customers use. It doesn't require a rest break. The one exception kind of being California, which has the 30-minute meal break, which is a thing outside of hours of service that we currently don't handle, but that is something that needs to be happen after 5 hours. But yeah, overall, these changes do not impact the state rule sets at all.
Yeah, okay, I'm seeing some questions around the theme of the break. So questions around what are the changes related to the break? Do personal conveyance and yard move count towards the break? So kind of a general clarification around the break here.
Sure. Just to give another high-level summary, before we had, as soon as you go on duty for the day, there's an 8-hour countdown that says after 8 hours, you need to take 30 minutes before you're able to drive again. And that 30 minutes had to be off duty. The change now is that whenever I start driving is when that 8-hour clock counts down, and it only continues to clock down if I'm in the driving status. So 8 hours counts down only with driving. And then to reset that 8 hours, basically you need to take a non-driving status, and that can actually be satisfied by either personal conveyance or yard move or on duty or sleeper or off. It just can't be the driving line. If that makes sense. So everything but the driving line can satisfy that 30-minute break in the new rules.
Got it. So there's kind of a clarification now about personal conveyance. Is there a limit to how long somebody can be on that duty status? Yeah, I guess
that's a good question. Yeah, so there's no limit right now. Obviously, there's audits that happen, and that's an area that inspectors will audit pretty heavily is your PC usage. So you definitely don't want drivers to be abusing that at all. Again, which is kind of why we have it off by default, and you are able to select and configure that proactively for drivers if you want them to use it. But yeah, there is no limit. If you're in Canada, for example, though, they do have a 75-kilometer limit. So, if any of you operate both in US and Canada, you know about that limit. But again, in the US, there is no limit to PC. You just need to monitor it. We have the duty status summary report that shows how long people are in personal conveyance. So that's another good way to audit how drivers are using that status. But again, no limit on PC in the US.
Great. So there's another clarification here just between passenger versus property. The question is related to that 30-minute break rule. Just trying to confirm that the change only applies to property and not passenger.
Correct. So passenger doesn't require any breaks. So this rule only applies to property drivers that are required that break.
Great. Here's another one. My drivers make continuous stops sometimes for 30 minutes on the way. Does that count towards the 8 hours, or do they have to stop after 8 hours even when they make several stops? I'm guessing that when they stop, they're kind of like taking a break there.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So, by the definition, the ELD will go back into on duty if the vehicle stopped for more than a certain period of time. So as long as they're in an on duty status for that 30 minutes, again, even if they're working, like even if they're unloading or something like that and they're not driving, that 30 minutes does count for the break. And that can also be taken. I saw another question here around, does it only count right at the 8 hours, or can I take it at the 5th hour? The answer is yeah, you can take that 30 minutes at any time, and then that will reset the 8 hours. Just know you just have to keep taking that 30 minutes every 8 hours of driving.
Yeah, there's some questions related to the waiting time option under driver settings. Can you explain what that does and when people would want to use that?
Yeah, so the waiting time, also known as oil field fifth line, is a very specific exemption provision for oiled field drivers and operators. So it's basically meant for if you're at an oil field and you're waiting while your truck is getting loaded and stuff like that. It's a special duty status that pauses the clocks. Not going to be relevant for majority of our drivers. It is something we offer for those customers, though, that may use the oil field fifth line, also known as waiting time.
A couple more questions before we wrap up here. One question about how will the FMCSA incorporate these changes?
Yeah, so the way it works is right now Samsara has a data file that is sent during a roadside or an audit, and that contains basically raw data of the driver logs. And so what happens is when you submit this information, the FMCSA system takes this data and they apply it in their own system, and then they're able to see violations and stuff like that on their end. So before, they're logging on the new rules, and then starting on September 29th, they changed their system to evaluate logs on the new rules. So what we're doing is we're basically saying we're going to make our system, our dashboard, and our driver app consistent with what the FMCSA and the DOT will see in their system in regards to violations and changes to the break-in clocks like that. So they've already made that change, and again, going live on the 29th. So again, that's why we sort of encourage drivers to update their app, so they're going to be able to see what the DOT will see. And there might be a difference there between if they don't update and then when they update.
Great. Also shifting gears a little bit, I think we have a number of folks on the line who haul produce and or meat. So there are questions related to, hey, my company does this. Do I need yard move? What about short haul, and how does that relate or interact with the ag exemption? Maybe Mike, you can speak to that a little bit.
So that's a good question. So the agriculture exemption is a little bit different to short haul. It's similar in that it's 150 air miles, but the difference is like all that time you don't need to do anything, whereas short haul you do need to keep a time card and stuff like that. So what we offer and what the government recommends in this case is using personal conveyance for that time for drivers that operate within 150 air miles. And then whenever they exceed that 150 air miles, they would change their duty status to driving and kind of have the ELD do that automatically. So we do have some information there as well for any of those interested in using PC for the agriculture exemption. And then in terms of the maybe the non-agriculture exemption people that are also using Samsara for maybe logging produce or stuff like that, yard move still kind of applies the same. Anything within that contained yard, you can use that duty status for those drivers as well.
Okay, so looking at the clock here, we'll do one last question. This relates back to, again, the difference between passenger and property. The adverse driving rules with the additional 2 hours of driving and off duty, does that apply in the same way to passenger carriers? Do we just add 2 hours to both the driver and the on-duty time?
That's correct. So instead of 10 and 15, you'll see when the driver claims that exemption in their app, those clocks will increase by 2 hours to each, so it'll be 12 and 17.
Great. Okay, so I know that there are a lot of questions that are still open. We have logged all of them, and we will be able to follow up with you after the webinar. We'll open a ticket for you. So if you haven't received an answer to your question, please don't worry, we will be getting that to you. But thank you, Mike, again for your Q&A. For those of you still on the line, I know that you hear us talk about getting feedback a lot, and all of our training webinars are no exception. So we would really love your feedback on this webinar. So if you have a smart device, take a moment, open up that camera app and hold it up to the QR code. A link will pop up on your screen. So I'll leave this slide up for you all so you can do that. Please go ahead and fill out our feedback survey right now. I promise it'll be really quick. And while we're doing that, a couple of announcements. Again, if you've submitted a question that we haven't been able to get to, we'll follow up with you after the webinar. I also want to just remind you that we'll be sending out an email later today with a couple of resources. You'll get a recording of today's training and a PDF handout of the slides that you saw today. Now, you might have noticed that there are a couple of webinars coming up, so make sure you mark your calendar. We'll be doing our Samsara quarterly on October 22nd. If you've never gone to one of those, you won't want to miss it. And if you've attended one in the past, you know that you'll want to save your spot as soon as possible. So the registration link for that will be in the follow-up email, so make sure you take a look and sign up there. So here, another plug, you can go ahead and scan that QR code, fill out that poll, that survey for us, give us your feedback, or just go to the URL here on the screen. And thank you guys for being here. I know there's still a lot of questions. We want to make sure that you're ready for the 29th, so we'll be following up. But that's what we got for you today. Thanks for joining. I hope you have a good rest of your day, and see you guys again soon.